Charles, how do you go from seeing the news of a coup in Mali to approaching their new government proposed to run their nation on Cardano? We follow political events, and whenever there's a military coup against a government, legitimate or otherwise, it's a news item. And one of the things is that when you overthrow a government, you have a new government come into place. That new government has a small window of time in the international community to set the tone of what it is. Is this a restoration of democracy, or a revolution against the tyrant, and then they'll reinstall a proper functioning government? Or will this be another dictatorship? One dictatorship to replace another. Turkey, for example, had a long history of Kemalism, and whenever the government got a little crazy and fundamentalist, the military would overthrow it, then enter a period of unease, and then eventually get back to elections. Unfortunately, the last time they tried, that failed, and now there's not such a good leader in Turkey. This is where Mali is at, and we're curious, as is the international community, is curious to understand what is the nature of this government, what does it want to do, where does it want to go, and how will it go about restoring legitimacy and rule of law in the body of nations. And of course, if they want to embrace blockchain technology, that's a really good way of doing it, because one of the first things you ask when you've overthrown a democratically elected government is, when we get back to democratic elections, how do we know that the voting is free and fair? E-voting on a blockchain would be a really good way of doing that. One of the first questions you ask when you overthrow a government, you start restoring property rights, is you say, well, how do we know that the property rights moving forward will be free and fair and immutable and unadulterated? Putting property on a blockchain would be a really good way of doing that. So we'll see, what direction they want to go in. It doesn't look too promising at the moment, unfortunately, but it's always an option that lives in the option space. And we are heavily involved in lots of things going on in Africa, as we are in Eastern Europe and Asia. And so it's impossible for these things to happen without us stumbling upon it or running into somebody who's either directly or indirectly impacted by it. It can be from internet being shut down in a nation. It can be from diaspora floating from one nation to another nation. It can be in bad policy, like what happened in Zambia and Zimbabwe. It can be in the imperialist policies of the Communist Party of China and the debt diplomacy that they're pushing on the continent. These are really complicated issues. And every now and then we run into some difficult situations. Like, for example, if we were to build an ID system and a voter registration system, if that system wasn't constructed correctly, then the system could actually bias the elections towards one candidate or political philosophy or another. And there's been more than one occasion where we've talked to a U.S. ambassador or a State Department, and they've had an unusually high level of interest in the things that we do, to the extent that they tell us to keep them in a loop. So everything is political in a certain respect. But that's the point. Technology is here to make people's lives better, and you have to be very careful with it, but you can't just judge people on the surface. You have to dig into the details and try to understand the grievances and see if people are legitimately there trying to make things better, or if those people are there for power and wealth and domination and destruction. And then once you've determined that, you can kind of decide where things fall.